Welcome, everyone. Ron and I are continuing our journey on having conversations with the people that we love, that interest us, and who we want to just speak to and have a conversation with. And today we have Reddy. Mary is an artist living on Whidbey Island, and I will leave it at that for now. Mary, if you have anything you want to add to my short introduction, please feel free.
I'm really happy to be here. I'll leave it at that.
So, one way that we can start is just to say what's been interesting you lately. We just before the podcast started, we were talking about not liking to use the word work, but for lack of a better word, where's your work been? What have you been interested in lately?
Yeah, I guess I will start with a little background that I've been involved with what was originally loosely called the nature program that you, Mindy, Ron, Deb, and then additionally Freya have led or have been leading for some years now. I've been around since nearly the beginning, I believe. And my early experience with it was this wonderful grounding in paying attention to nature with your senses. Deb brought some really good tracker kind of awareness in, wildness, going into the wilderness. Well, actually, even in your own backyard, you can do this. You can sit and observe and feel and sense. So I really enjoyed that. One thing I longed for, though, was to have it open up a bit more to subtle beings in the area. And at first, I was not trying for that because it was a new experience to be so sensory oriented and so just still and being physically in place in the environment. But as that program has evolved, and actually as my work has evolved, my engagement, I have been more and more active on that level. And it's been primarily a kind of relationship that's growing with the she. And it's with she who show up for me. They have, in the past, been something I experienced as a group. I would feel a group of them, and I would just sense it in almost the way you can feel if someone walks into a room and you haven't yet seen them. You just sense there's a presence. What I love is that this physical grounding and using your senses, that initial training in this experience that we've all been a part of, it was echoing a trend that I have been on since years ago when I studied shamanic practices. I have always been able to dissociate. And of course, it's very common among children who've had a horrible traumatic childhood that they just learn how to leave their bodies and go off somewhere. And so in my first engagement with shamanism, that's what I would do. You follow the practices of grounding and centering, and then you just off. Mm-hmm. And somebody could drop a book in the room I was in, and I wouldn't hear it because I was off somewhere having another experience. Lorian really pulled me away from that particular manner of engaging with subtle worlds, with its emphasis on incarnation. You came here to be in a body for a reason. There's a lot to be experienced in this body. And so for some years, I've been more and more practiced in not leaving physically when I attune. So given all that, the growing relationship with the she, I feel like maybe it was a year or 2 years ago that it seemed to amp up for all of us. There was an alliance class And Ron, I can't remember if that was just last summer or the summer before. I think it might have been the summer before, but it was during that class while I was simultaneously engaged with the nature group that I partnered with some other Lorians here on Whidbey Island, and we started going into Saratoga Woods, the forest behind my house. And our goal was to bring the she into that forest. And, my initial expectation was a little more based in shamanic practice, where I felt there's a depression on this forest. It has always felt sad, oppressed, under some gloom, some cloud. And I thought, we're going to go in, we'll find the spirit of place, we'll see what we need to do to heal it, right? The she had other thoughts about it entirely. And it's not to say that there aren't areas where I feel there's some kind of pall over the growth or the trees. I mean, it's a place that was clear cut and then planted. So, it's not one of your old growth forests. But what the she did is something I think we all know is a really good practice, and that is go in to see what's working. Don't go in thinking, oh, there's something wrong here. What can we do about it? And so, there were four of us. We went in with she, and we walked very slowly. It was very ceremonial. And there was that brightening of sensation that you get sometimes when the she are around, where things appeared more colorful, more lit up. And we went to an area of the forest. It's a trail that's called the Bent Tree Trail. And it's got a number of trees that have trunks that go sinuously around along the ground and then twist and then go up. And it's always felt kind of magical, that particular area. Well, when we tuned into it with all the she that were with us, I realized it was the most alive area of the woods that I have ever felt. And I felt like I was stepping into a community actively in process. Like this is already going on. You're welcome to come in and feel it and see it. But man, we've been doing this. That was the feeling I got from it. And at that time, I often will close my eyes, which goes against all those nature observing practices we were working on earlier. But I will close my eyes to start to sense the energetic flow. And in that first experience in the woods, the she appear visually to me in my mind's eye, I guess you'd say, or in the imaginal world. They're almost like columns of gray. And I could see them arrayed in a circle around the bent tree area. So that was the beginning of what I now feel is a deepening practice for me. During several of those forest visits, Lucinda was one of the people who was going with me, and she helped me by noting that early on when she was working with the she began to say, she asked for a physical signal that they were present so that she wouldn't keep questioning it and saying, oh, this is just my imagination. And so she has her particular physical thing that she feels when they show up. So I asked for something similar, and I was on my way walking to the woods when I asked for it, and I was imagining what it could be. And while I was imagining various things it could be, I felt someone energetically take my hand. And then someone took my other hand, and I felt like my hands were being held. And that has been the sign that we agreed on and that they use and that I recognize. And so I can sometimes feel she presence without that, but hardly ever now is it unaccompanied by that feeling of having my hands held. So the other thing that's evolved is, and this is something I maybe experienced briefly several times years ago when I tried to get in touch with a she, I would start to feel a physical energy body revving up, just becoming more like, it's hard to describe. I'm sure you felt it, Ron, so you know what I'm talking about, but it's almost as though things get a little more active, fast moving, lit up, fiery, energetic in your auric body, in your energy body. So I'd felt that once or twice before, and after beginning this hand holding practice, I have noticed that that's the way in which, after I feel that my hands are held, I can start inviting the she to merge with me in my physical body to the extent that is safe and useful for both of us. And when I do that, I get not only that amped up feeling, but I can sometimes even get a little more heart racing. I'll get warm. After a while, I'll have to say, okay, enough. And that I have not found that doing that leaves me with any particular messages. It's not like I'm getting downloads. Okay, thank you. Now that we understand that, we want to go over to that tree, or nothing like that happening. But it has felt like it's initiatory. Mm-hmm. And so then to add another little chapter to this, we had kind of a winter hiatus, the four of us who were doing this forest work on the island. And we got together recently to pick it up again. And we, just in my living room, we tuned in to the she that are present to us. And this word neighborhoods came through in the same way that I had noticed that the bent tree area in the woods is a neighborhood, and that there are different neighborhoods in that woods. And the four of us had all observed that and agreed on that. And so when we were checking to see, well, what do we do next? The message was about going to different neighborhoods and bringing the she into them in a way that through us, they are seeing them more like humans see them. That's the best I can describe it, because they may or may not see these places in their she world.
Yeah, I think that's really most likely. And Mary, just to kind of describe for some of our listeners or viewers, the word that we're using, she, is actually spelled Sidhe. It comes from a Celtic term, which is sometimes spelled differently. Even I've seen it as CI. The she are actually, you might say, cousins or kin of humans. In the description after we're done, I will actually put a couple of links to books that people want to find out more. Mm-hmm. But Mary, I think what you're saying is really important, because our last visitor was David Spangler. She was talking about the energetic shifts that she's finding in her own relationship with her world around her. Mm-hmm. And very strong, very strong. I feel that we are in this period where you might say the borders of our two realms have come much closer together, but they're still separate. Mm-hmm. And when we work closely with them, it's almost, and I think you used the word recently, it's like the fog is lifted.
Yeah.
Or the clouds are parted.
Yeah, that was an image I got so after the four of us decided they'd asked us to work with different neighborhoods. We agreed that we would go to each of our houses where we live, and the land, the yard, the garden, whatever it be that was where we live. And so that would be, we would do these neighborhood visits, and we've done one so far to Victoria's house. And during that connection, that was where I got that image visually, actually, of a place rising above the mist, coming out of the fog into view for the she. And once lifted, likely it would then become a known spot where they could continue to go with or without us there. But be aware that's it's a human landscape that they're now able to see and access. And Ron, I think you had described something like that as almost opening a portal for them.
Yeah, I because I've actually had a similar sense of things around my own land. You might call it a will to relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this energy of reconnection and relationship. And in order to do that, it means that we have to reach out and say, here we are. In a certain way, we're invisible.
Yeah.
And I think that when we reach out and say, here we are, and then like you talk about having your hands taken, you reach out and somebody says, oh, wait a minute, I can sense there's a hand there. I had an image of it not too long ago where, somebody's up above, so to speak. They're in a space station.
Mm-hmm.
God. And suddenly a light comes on. Like, from you look at the views of the Earth from space at night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just these rings of light, because our cities are so lit up. It was kind of like that. It's like a light comes on. And then there's oh, look, somebody just turned on the light. And so it does make things more visible. I think that's what we're doing. I think we're turning on the light. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the ways that I prepare to invite relationship with the she is by focusing on my self-light first. I get fully in my body and I feel my self-light. Walking somewhere quickly and think, oh, maybe I want the she. Engaged with me here. I won't go through all of those steps. I'll just you can if you've done it enough, you start to feel like this is when I'm bright. I'm going to become bright. And then it does seem like you're turning on a light for them to see.
Yeah.
So many interesting things there. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess the first thing that came to mind when you were talking is, we've had these conversations before in these episodes of the imaginal world. And as you described it, in quotes, the imaginal world, I just started to feel like instead of a thing that we're generating, perhaps the imagination is a place that we're going. And that it's a ground where we can meet.
That's close to what I was just thinking. One of the ways I think of it is it's a language space. It's going into an area where maybe you could even describe it as a musical instrument too, but it's going into an area where there's a certain form that is something that you understand instinctively, and you're making it available to not only your own creative impulses, but to whatever beings might connect with you in that imaginal world. And they, in order to really communicate, they will need to get used to your vocabulary in a way. It's
Well,
kind of
yeah,
similar to
right.
what you've described,
Like a
Ron.
translation space
Yeah.
where the parameters are more permissive,
Exactly.
where we've all agreed, okay, I know the real world, and you want to still be able to converse and be fluid and fluent in whatever it is that we're calling the real world here, although that feels more and more imaginal. And then there's the imaginal world. And by saying that, all of a sudden, all these other things become possible. And anything that enters is valid or more valid.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have our discernment. We still have, our intentions and all the things. But all of a sudden, it's like the space beyond the space. Like all of a sudden, the parameters are widened.
Yeah.
And there's more allowance and acceptance and just more available, more communication available.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting because this space, I believe, is where we go if we do shamanic journeying.
Mhm.
And you may describe it as the upper or the middle or the lower world. And imaginally, it will take on that form. I also think it's where remote viewing takes place.
Mhm.
And those practices are things that are used by people who are very non-imaginal in my view. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to be imaginal, is what I'm saying. So, for example, if you're working for the army and
Right.
you're being trained to remote view in order to figure out, what the defenses are on the other side or something like that. It's just this thing exists. This
Right.
It's not even one thing, but I lack vocabulary as to what to call it. But it's a space where communication and translation occurs.
Mhm.
Jung, right, in active imagination, engages it as a way to speak with your own psyche, with your dream content. And whenever I think about that, I always imagine, well, I wonder if some subtle beings are sneaking in there too.
And also, I think it's a meeting ground.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever else the she go, where we may or may not be able to follow, like this is a world that they can access and we can access. And it feels like a space for meeting. I don't know if there's this podcast, which I actually haven't listened to entirely, but it's about autistic and nonverbal kids
Yeah,
who
I
all
listened to
meet in the
some.
place called The Hill,
Yeah.
and it feels like the same sort of thing. Like there's ground where we can meet and connect
Mm-hmm.
that has different parameters, but that's real, as
Yeah,
real
yeah,
as this, or
yeah. And
perhaps
then
more so.
Mary, I'm curious because each one of us kind of encounters this imaginal region in different ways. Some people see visions, other people hear things. So how is that for you? How do you actually, now you talked about this having a physical sense of holding on,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm wondering how it plays out in your experience.
Beyond that physical sense, you mean?
Yeah, well, do you have like a visual sense, or because imaginal perception? I'm curious if you have ways in which you perceive
Sure.
that you can talk more about.
Yeah, and being a visual artist, it's no surprise that it's predominantly visual for me. Uh, though interestingly, I've only very occasionally gotten a visual of a she who showed up. More often than not, they are columnar presences, but there's always a feeling of entering a scene.
Mm.
And in some cases, I will just get colors. Depends, I guess. I'll give you a couple of examples, though, where it was a little more vivid. There was a time meditating with Christy at your place, Ron, and she showed up and invited me on an art tour. And they took me to see various works of art that they were creating or had created. And this is where I think it's interesting, where the translation, the imaginal translation, can sometimes be thin or break down, because I felt like I was moving through almost a hallway, but it was in the air. and I was seeing things. And when I came back to my world, I could only remember a few of the things I'd seen. And one of them I then tried to paint, and I just couldn't, the colors could not get alive enough. There's no way. So that was interesting. Another time, this was there was a trip to the She Yates country with Jeremy and Soren Haug, however you say his name. And we were on the slopes of Ben Bulben, where historically the veil is very thin. And we all sat in a circle. I actually was standing, and I closed my eyes and I sank under the hill. I literally felt myself going down. And I felt like I was in this area of brilliant architecture. Can't quite describe it much better than that. And there was she, and we had a bit of a conversation, and I can't remember anything that they said. But I remember what I told them about. And at the time, I got on a little bit of a soapbox, and and I was describing to them what human trauma was like, and how difficult it is to pull out of it, and how much people are to be lauded for going through it and then coming out the other end. And I wanted them to know a little bit more about what it was like to be human. So I had that conversation with them. And again, when I came back into myself and opened my eyes, I don't remember what their response was. And then finally, with the visit to the neighborhood at Victoria's, so our first experience of making that area visible. First of all, I think hers was pretty visible to begin with. She has been working with nature spirits and the divas there for some time. In that area, I got a very beautiful visual of the diva of her garden. And she appeared as a tall woman dressed in regal, multicolored clothing. She had peacock blue headdress on that came to a V over her forehead, and this glowing, multicolored, flowing mantle on. And she was just lovely. I just loved the energy coming from her, and it was really nice to see her. And so I told Victoria about it after, we all stopped attuning. And the next day, Victoria wrote me and said that, because Victoria had said she's never seen this diva as anything other than a column of light. So the next day, Victoria wrote me and said she had connected with the diva, who said that she had really enjoyed meeting me and was happy to show herself in multicolored clothing or something like that. And it's things like that no matter how much you do this, the more you get a sense that someone else has also experienced this, or there's some confirmation of what you saw. I think that's wonderful support, for any concern you might have that, this is stuff we make up.
Yeah. Yeah, and how we each perceive it so differently, and yet the energy sense, something, the essence or something comes through, regardless of the the presentation, that's what I found fascinating, is I can perceive something, but I have to be careful not to hold it too literally, because somebody else could be perceiving the same thing, but in an entirely different form.
Mm-hmm.
But the essence is there. The essence is the same.
There's that great phrase, the energetic stamp, right? It's as though we all have identifiers that can be felt. I feel that with like just ordinary ESP during the day, that I think more and more of us are feeling more and more of that, where, you think of somebody and then they call, that kind of thing. Well, it's starting to extend for me beyond just my family and dear friends. I'll send an email to some work colleague and I will know when they got it. I'll just feel that I am in their mind at that moment. So that's some strange energetic identifier, I think, that allows us to feel that or sense that someone else has connected with us in some way. Well, I wanted to go slightly in a different direction, and we can certainly come back to this direction, but we talked about the imaginal, and one thing I want to make a point of, I guess, is that in connecting with the she energetically, in seeing these visions that they help me to see, a side effect, or maybe even one of the primary intended effects, is that I can go out into my yard now and I'm not intentionally connected with the she. I don't feel their presence, but there is a brightness, that the brightness of the life going on there is just becoming more and more a daily evidential sight for me. And that, I think, it's like you want things to be going both ways. We don't want to just keep going up and up. We got to also be bringing in and just having that ordinary everyday life be seen and recognized as the wonderland that it is.
I love that. And that stood out for me when you spoke of going into the woods and how everything brightened. And you were talking about creating a portal that the she could see through us. But I was thinking, well, that goes both ways. And some of the brightness that you may have been experiencing might have been from them.
Mm-hmm.
That was that portal and them seeing, you seeing through their eyes as well.
Yeah.
Where those colors come alive, where the light brightens or shimmers or sparkles or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That is an indication of the two-way portal.
Right. I had never seen a visual of a diva before until I saw the one at Victoria's Garden. And I think that the she helped enable that.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's actually right. My sense of it, Mary, for myself, is that because their realm and their lives are actually more vibrational. When in assuming a physical body like ours, and living on a physical planet, or the physical aspect of the planet, I would like to say, rather than a physical, it's the physical aspect of this planet, which has many different energetic aspects. We've, over time, and I think actually it's been a certain benefit over the last several hundred years, we don't necessarily have that same energetic connection that we had in past centuries. When we make that connection, my experience is when we make that connection with the she, we are in that that meshing of presence, I'll call it. They're tapping into our energetic level, and we're tapping into their energetic level. And there's a sharing. And I think that's really important to know that there's a sharing going on. And that is actually changing the nature of the connection between our two realms.
Mm-hmm.
We're exchanging information. And that actually, what's interesting, I don't think that's not us just connecting with the she. And we're not like getting it through them as much as we're awakening our own capacities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's the real point. And I've been getting this. It's like, no, we're not doing it for you. We're awakening you to your own capacity.
Yeah. That totally fits my experience. Yeah, the going out into the art and everything is brighter. I don't think it's necessarily because they are somewhere in the area. It's similar to the slight increase I'm feeling with this ESP stuff, where I believe this is happening to all of us who are making ourselves available to it. That there's a heightened level of human beingness that we are being invited into and supported in getting to. Mm-hmm. And so these are just like little snippets of signs that, that this is where we're going. That's the road we're on.
It's happening pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We talked about that last time when we met with Marin, how quickly things are changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that what I was saying about how we also have to bring it down and be here. That's the other thing that this heightened perception of myself in my neighborhood, in my yard, for example, is helping me with is this it really lands me right in the middle. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm surrounded by life, none of which is thinking about a bill that has to be paid next week, or what's going to go on with world powers. None of that is at issue. And it almost feels to me as though the world, Earth, Gaia in that physical form craves our attention at that level, to just go and be with it. Because look at how we have ignored it. So many of us in humanity over centuries have just moved farther and farther away from nature and from anything that grounded as having any worth or value at all.
For me is that she always, I always, when I encounter them or when I envision them or when I ask where the connection to them is or what they are to me, maybe it's the way I was taught about what they were, but it always becomes very clear to me, the cousin aspect of it, that in some ways we share some form of makeup that connects us more, maybe not to use a quantitative or a value judgment, but then other subtle beings, that we have this kinship in that. And it also draws me to the place where we, separated. Like, what's the difference? Where did we go that they chose not to? Where can they be where we have less ability or capacity or whatever it is to go? And I find that, that space, that moment, or that time, or that point feels like that imaginal space again where we connect. And I do always think about, okay, so then what is the choice to be an incarnational human, the things that we are? What is that? What, how does that make us different? What experiences are we able to have that are needed that we ventured to go seek or to go experience? And then how do we relay that back? And vice versa, how do they, then convey their world to us, which does feel much less physical. Like it definitely feels like we've decided to have this connection with the material. And it does feel like they've had a vibrational existence that's just less solid as far as like things.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of that for yourself? How that may have, because in a certain way, there's, you might say the myth. There's a myth that we hold. It's held in different ways. It was in Tolkien, and when the elves left in Middle Earth.
Well, and part of what fascinates me about that is it becomes such an area of, well, this is my experience, this is someone else's experience. Someone says it's this, someone says it's this, someone says it looks like this, someone says it looks like that. Everybody is allowed to be right and have their own experience. And to me, that defines where they are. Like we're kind of sifting it through this world and it becomes one thing or another, becomes a shape or a color or somewhere it's coming from the same place. Like I believe the idea of the she is real, but when we filter it through, it becomes different things for different people. I'm always fascinated, especially with the she, to hear what people think the she are, or how they experience the she, or what they say they are.
Yeah.
This connection, this kinship, this cousin relationship is always interesting to me.
When you talk about going back to that time of the split, and where did we, who became more and more incarnate, where did we go? Why did we go there? The thing that always comes to mind for me is that we may have done that in order to explore difference.
And I think that's exactly what it is. What I remind myself more and more is we agreed to feel separate so that we could experience something.
Yeah.
The she may not have. And so there's more of a union feeling there. And that feels like truth.
And I feel like we are now moving from that back toward feeling what as one. Not
I agree.
I think, but also with all of us humans and with this world, we come in with the knowledge we've gained from our assignment, right?
Yeah.
Over these eons or centuries, however long it's been.
But I do think, okay, what were they? I don't know if preserving is the right word, but we'll use it for this little exercise. What were they preserving when they held back from where we said we were going?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good question.
And what are the differences there? It brings us back to our capacity to that as well. And I think, we didn't go off on this adventure for nothing. We were coming back with wisdom and with experiences. But I think part of that is coming back. Like I do feel like this is a time where there's a reunification of that breaking off point.
I keep hearing this phrase actually. Congratulations, you've completed your assignment. It's as though we went on an assignment, a sabbatical, a fellowship off to this other land of experiences, and it's time to come back and integrate all that we learned while we were there.
I like that a lot, and
I
I
do
think
too.
that is a true place for us to end because I just like the celebratory nature of that
Mhm.
and the invitation to relax and enjoy where we are.
Yeah.
We tend to be as humans, maybe part of that separation is we're hard on ourselves. You know, whatever's happened here, there's some accountability that I think is important. And also there's like we're hard on ourselves too about whatever it is. It's hard not to be when we look out at the world and say,
Yeah.
how did this happen? So I like the idea that the congratulatory and the okay, now it's time to come back. Well, thank you so much for spending time. It's always a pleasure, and this was lovely.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed
So
it.
much.
Yeah, Mary, you're welcome anytime.
Absolutely.
All right. I'll let you know if some other great big thing has happened that we can talk about, or even lots of little things.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mindy. It's really good to see you again. You know, this is going to be real fun.